Welcome to the Dispo Growth Summit. I'm really excited. It's really tough to have a great performing dispensary without a high performing team. And developing a high performing team is something that can separate you from your competitors head and shoulders every day of the week. To help us develop and cultivate a high performing team, I brought in a real expert for you. Her name's Jessica Cranney. Jessica is the CEO of GRN Mile High. And what Jessica does every single day, and in fact, in her entire career, as you'll learn as we discuss things with Jessica a little bit more, Jessica recruits, hires, retains top performing talent. What she's going to do today is share with you tips on how you too can find, recruit, and ultimately hire the kind of people that are going to drive you to success. Jessica, thanks for joining us. Let's kick things off right off the bat. When I'm looking for potential candidates, where are some of the most effective methods or effective ways I should be looking to source them? Where am I going to find them?
That's a great question. And I think that in our industry, and first of all, thank you, Brian, for having me, and really glad to be here with everybody. There's a lot of tools out there. And one of the things that I think is unique to our industry is we can leverage social media and outlets a little bit differently. Instagram, while it's not always the most cannabis friendly, depending on the type of role that you're looking for, especially on the cultivation side, people will also often leverage their craft with a hashtag, right? It might be master grower or cultivation. And so you can leverage Instagram as a unique source. That being said, though, that's a little bit of a less traditional one. Truly, LinkedIn and ZipRecruiter, Indeed, are tremendous resources. But one of the things is you lose a lot of the human element. And so I really encourage, our clients and operators to work with the human element. Leverage your HR team, leverage your internal talent attraction team, and leverage your recruiter if need be. So those are some of the places that you can find people. But, when you think about effective methods, I always tell people, be very transparent when it comes to accurate job descriptions and clarity about what you're hiring for. Who are you really looking for? Create something that's compelling and unique and attracts the audience maybe a little bit differently than just a standard job description that we ripped off of Indeed. And also, lastly, think about an internal referral programs and offering an incentive to your internal employees for bringing their friends or family to your great operator.
Which is a great tip. Your internal employees are great networking sources for you, not only who they can refer, but as you pointed out, they're involved in Instagram. Many of them have connections with others in the canna community. And it's a great tip and a great source to do that. One of the things you mentioned is really being clear on what you're hiring for. Do you find that a problem with a lot of companies in the cannabis space?
Yes. Without getting too far into examples, I think sometimes operators don't always know what they're looking for, and might think that they're looking for, a quick example, they're looking for an operations director. And this is a true story. They went to Indeed, pulled an operations director job description, posted it, and wasn't quite finding who they were looking for. And so they came to me about 60 days into their search. And I said, okay, so what troubles are you finding? And saving you guys all of the details. First of all, they were calling it an operations director, and it was about a $65,000 to a $70,000 a year job. In most cases, that's not going to be a director level position that's going to attract the right candidate for what your compensation range is. Two, what they told me was, none of these people have a skill or a desire to, manage our HVAC, our plumbers, our electricians for our multiple sites. They had a handful of retail and cultivation warehouses. And I said, okay, well, that's not really an operations director. That's a facilities manager. And we can find that person for $65,000 or $70,000. But they weren't really looking for the right thing. And so understanding and having clarity about what the team is looking for, calling it the right thing, and being clear in your job description and not relying upon generic titles or generic job descriptions to bring you really what it is that you're looking for. And sometimes, we got to be specific and be clear, but that starts with, at the company level, really defining what is the need and who is the ideal person that's going to close that gap for us.
One of the other things you touched upon that I really want to spotlight, I'm in Phoenix, and right now I can go to Indeed, and there are probably 15 dispensaries that are looking for bud tenders on Indeed. And literally, probably without exception, I could take the ads from all 15, white out their name, substitute in somebody else's, and never really tell the difference. You talked about the importance of being unique. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? In other words, why they need to really stand out?
Yeah, and I think this really ties back to company culture. Not only when you're recruiting new employees, but ultimately the employee experience is what will drive your customer experience. And the net of this is driving growth in your dispensaries. And bud tenders and the people who do that are really critical. And you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who's a bud tender or a retail sales team or wholesale sales team who's out there delivering a really extraordinary customer experience if they have kind of a average humdrum internal experience. And so, I challenge clients to think about, like, what is your company culture and why does it, one, attract people to stay? And then what's going to attract people to come and be a part of it? And it's not copying and pasting a traditional job description with a traditional title. And like you said, kind of, white papering it, really.
Sure. Looks like no effort was put into it whatsoever, huh?
Yeah. It's my logo. Here's our colors, our font. But what do you do to differentiate yourself and tell people a story, give them something to connect to, on the job description? Does it say a little bit more about who they'll be working for? Or, maybe it's posted by somebody in HR, but the hiring manager is a different role. And I'm not saying you have to put that person's LinkedIn profile on the posting, but this person, it's posted by HR. It's going to report to retail dispensary managers. It's going to collaborate with this wholesale department, these vendor, but like paint a picture differently for them than something that, are you able to stand for 8 hours a day and lift up to 25 pounds and, deliver a nice customer experience? Differentiate yourself within your own team and bring that to life when you're recruiting. Put your materials together differently. If you're hiring for bulk events, put an event together that isn't just balloons with some music in the background, right? But bring your company culture to part of the brand that is connecting to and engaging these people and attracting them to join your team.
And the reality is, to take your point, the reality is that I want to hire people that other people would like to hire. I want to hire winners, and I'm assuming that those winners are in demand by others, and I need to be doing something to let them know why they should be spending their time and their career and their opportunity with me rather than my competitor, right?
Or retaining people from going to your competitor. I talk often, especially sales, many of them will say, bring me the next best paycheck and I'll keep my options open. And I really enjoy it, and it warms my heart when I hear somebody say, you know what? No, I'm really good here. I like what I'm doing. I believe in who I'm doing it with. I trust the long-term vision. It's not just a sales job for me. It's not just a processing job for me. I'm connected to something bigger. But ultimately, and I think that's where the art of recruiting and attracting the right people comes from. And it's more than the science. I think the science is the technical aspect. Here's a job description and some bullets. Here's a resume. Do enough of those match? Great. Let's move forward. The art comes in the human connection and the human element. And more so than what they're doing, whether they're the CFO or a salesperson or a bud tender or a trimmer, do they feel connected to not only what they're doing, but who they're doing it with and for? And if there is that long-term connection, it becomes so much more than this is my job and I wake up and I punch the clock. It becomes, this is my team, this is my professional family, this is my work home, and I plan to stay here long-term. and I want to bring other people in, my friends and family, and I don't want to leave if people try to recruit me. And I'm going to actively be a strong brand ambassador to bring in other people to my organization. But that really has to start with, again, that company culture being really well defined. And how you engage the hearts and minds of your team will earn you the right to ask them to engage the hearts and minds of our patients and consumers.
Great point. Great point. All of us that have ever done hiring have hired people that haven't worked out.
For sure. Nobody bats 1,000.
Absolutely. I often used to say, if I could hire with 100% certainty, people would be paying me $100,000 an hour to interview. The reality, though, is there are certain red flags that might pop up more so than others that should kind of concern us. Do you have a few red flags you can share in hiring in a dispensary specifically that people might want to be aware of?
Yeah, one, I'll kind of unpack that into two ways. In a retail dispensary, you run the risk of what any retailer runs the risk of. Burnout and turnover is high. Mm-hmm. And so looking for red flags in their job history, such as job hopping, right? If they've not stayed anywhere longer, it's a little bit of a crass joke, but, I had a friend who used to say, oh, they change jobs like they change underwear.
Right.
If they're, looking at, if
so
they haven't,
turnover.
If they've got a previous job hopper background, and you're not providing a compelling reason to engage them, you probably run the risk of them job hopping on you.
Yep.
I think the other thing is, and this is a little bit more industry specific, cannabis is unique. And I think that some people, when you're coming in from out of the industry, and whether you're being hired as a bud tender in a dispensary or a VP of retail and leading several dispensaries across a state or several states, when you come in from out of the industry, I think it's very easy to be blindsided by splashy headlines. XYZ cannabis company brings in $250 billion. But these people have never heard of and can't even spell 280E taxation.
Right.
And so they get enamored by, I'm going to go work in weed, and they're printing money, and I'm going to get high on my 15-minute break. And I really find that it's my ownership to terrify people when we're having, discovery calls or qualifying calls. You're not going to walk into this well-oiled, in many cases, this perfect machine that everything is the same every day. If you're taking over multiple locations or coming into a location, we have to be scrappy. And if you come from a traditional industry, I like to say you can be proud of your white collar roots, but you got to be prepared to roll up your sleeves and show blue collar work ethic, because your job is going to be something different every day. And you might be the head of retail, but you're going to have to take out the trash.
Okay.
Or you might have to ring a till and weigh some weed on a Friday or 420 when your lobby is full of people. You might have 3 different dispensaries that all look different. They're scheduled differently. Their vendor contracts are different. It's not like if you came from leading 6 stores at Nike, where everything was, cookie cutter, kind of all the same. You're going to come into 6 stores and a cannabis operator, and really every single one of them needs, a little bit different attention. Your clientele is different. And while that is a challenge, it's also really fun. And it's a luxury that, think about the people who come in to shop at a dispensary. Gang, I came from AT&T, telecom, cell phones. People don't get excited to go to a utility company. Let's be really clear. In fact, they're excited to go to the dispensary after they've been to the utility company.
Or
people
before.
Excited to shop with us, whether it's medicinal or recreational. Our products are cool. They're sexy. It's something you want to do. And so we should view it as that. I'm not just weighing weed. I have the opportunity to educate somebody on something. Gone are the days of just, here's a joint or here's some flour. That's cool in my preference. But like 20 years ago, we didn't have dabs.
Yep.
Edibles were not what they were today. We didn't have infused beverages. And so we have to be proud of that. And so look for that kind of esprit de corps about coming into the industry, more than, cool, man, I want to work in weed because I can get high and you guys seem to be making a lot of money.
So
Why do you want to
a
work
real
here?
red flag for you is job hopping. Another red flag for you could be their attitude or their perception, especially for those that are outside the industry. When
One
you
way
run,
you can guard against that is ask them how they've educated themselves. Hey, you're
okay,
coming in from out of the industry, or maybe you are in the industry. How do you keep yourself attuned to what's going on, or keep a pulse on what it is that we're doing here?
I again, you're the expert in this area, but from my experience, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, everybody has these different perspectives that they bring to it, and it's important to understand it. All right, now let's talk about. I've got a candidate. I've got someone I'm excited about. I think might be right. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk like you and I are talking now. What are some of the things that I want to keep in mind to conduct an engaging interview? One that gives me information that I can use to assess the candidate, but also gets the candidate kind of excited about me and what I've got going on. You have some tips in that interview stage or what I can be doing there?
You bet. And people probably should be paying you $100,000 to interview candidates. Because it's exactly what we're doing right now. I'm not saying there shouldn't be a guide and something that is leading the discussion, but be personable, be authentic, get to know somebody. If they're showing up at your hiring event, or if they've submitted a resume online and you're interviewing them, you've already gotten enough to know about them on paper that made you want to say, tell me more. So get to know these folks. I'm not saying to not ask situational or, example-based questions, but if you sit there with a list of 10, tell me about a time when questions, one, you'll be bored to tears as an interviewer. Two, your candidate's not going to feel like there's anything to connect them. And three, if they are a candidate who's exploring options, they've got those questions down pat. And they might not even be their own answers in some cases. I told the story at the time I nursed that baby bird back to health on my bosom. They didn't even do that. It was their best friend. Right. So they've gotten that. Think about things that are unique. And that also doesn't mean how many pennies. We're all about creative problem solving. How many pennies would it take to fill up this room? But just get to know them, be personal, ask questions that are important to what they'll be doing and how that ties back into your company's greater picture. Them coming into work in your retail dispensary might be a stepping stone for them, and they've got a background in something else or a passion for something else that once they're brought on board, we tap into. The other thing I would say is don't be afraid to pressure test. The biggest challenge in retail is attendance in many cases, getting people who not only do show up, but continue to show up and can be relied upon.
Right.
Don't be afraid to pressure test some of those difficult questions up front. How would your, previous or current employer rate your attendance or reliability? It uncover why they want to be there, what they're looking for in a new role. Is why they're looking to leave their current role something that your team may not be able to solve? Let's address that up front so that we're not wasting time and they're not job hopping on you.
And you're really helping the candidate out by doing that too, right? You're not going to waste anybody's time when you get to those kinds of things pretty quickly.
I almost challenge you, go for the no.
Right.
The reasons that cause attrition and turnover today, ask those in the interview and own that. Hey, we want to find the right person. We might ask you some, unconventional or unique or maybe even uncomfortable questions in an interview. Nothing, personal. I'm not going to ask how much money's in your bank account, but we might do this a little bit differently, but we really want to vet out and make sure that we're finding the right folks, and it's a two-way good match.
It's important for the person that's conducting the interview to understand two things as well. One, that person they're interviewing could be a customer. Number two, that person that they're interviewing, what they're really doing, if that person becomes an employee, is they're kind of laying the groundwork for how the relationship's going to go, aren't they?
Yeah.
And so you can get two critical questions and still be respectful, still be personable, and still set a good environment, right?
Yeah. And I think to that point, if you are doing an event or mass hiring, think about ways to make it more like a networking event and less like a hiring event. So that initial interview, are there tchotchkes around or different brands or partners? Gosh, can you partner with one of your vendor partners to do a mutual hiring fair? But then you've got a table with some, brand paraphernalia, or maybe you've got some of your best and brightest employees that are hanging around, kind of like a networking event, talking about why they like being there. Or you part of that initial interview process is, HR or the hiring manager sits down and does the general resume review and get to know you. But then they have a secondary interview with an internal employee that could be that great brand ambassador and tells them a little bit more about what it's like to be on this side of the fence. Hey, I've sat on the interview side. Now I'm sitting here as an employee. Let me tell you why I'm here, why I like it, why I think you should consider us differently.
That's and again, excellent tips. One of the things you touched a lot about is culture and how your culture fits and all of that. Do you have some strategies or tips or maybe some certain things to look at that I could kind of use to help me assess a candidate's cultural fit with my company?
Yeah, and some of them aren't very concrete. It is that
and that's a good point. It's tough to be concrete when you're talking about culture, isn't it? I mean, especially when you're assessing somebody's perspective.
Yeah, I will say it's not tough to quantify culture from the company side, and I'll give you two sets of keywords: cultural cadence and signature moves. We can come back to that later, but that is effectively, what is your company's cultural DNA and how do you bring that to life monthly, quarterly, annually, what have you.
Okay.
But when looking from the candidate side and seeing if they're a good fit, one, that is the value of that human element and not relying too heavily on AI or automated systems to make hiring decisions for you. There is that human element. But what I just said is often what I challenge not only clients, but candidates with, and I would encourage you to use the same question when you're interviewing. People, clients and candidates alike, anybody always says, looking for that right culture fit. When I ask them to define that, and they're not wrong, but when I ask them to define that, I am so often met with either like deer in the headlight, like, I don't want to be micromanaged. Okay. What does that mean to you? How does somebody demonstrate that through behaviors, actions? So like, I want you to define culture for me. What does that look like, sound like, feel like if you're an employee of this company? Conversely, when you're interviewing potential candidate or candidate potential employee, can you define what culture means for me? You're looking for a good culture. What does that mean to you? How can we bring that to life for you? Right. And if somebody says, well, I'm really looking for remote work. Well, unfortunately, this is a retail dispensary and we're not Amazon. So we're not a remote retailer.
Right.
But, define what culture, and it's easier to ask this question of a candidate if you have it defined as a company. Hey, candidate, Brian, our corporate culture is as follows. We bring it to life with these monthly meetings, these quarterly events, these what have yous. Here's how we communicate. Here's what we do at onboarding. Here's how we, manage performance or what have you. We've defined our corporate culture. What are some things that you're looking for? How do you define and quantify that? And so if you're able to speak to how you define and quantify your own culture as a team, it's then easier to turn that question and ask them the same. But don't be surprised if somebody says, well, I don't know what that looks like or sounds like or feel like. I just know that I want a good culture. It's almost something that people have been coached. It's a word that's overused, which is why I always press on define that, quantify it.
Okay. How important are reference checks, background checks? Are they important from your perspective? And if so, are there certain things that somebody should ask or touch upon when they're doing them?
Yeah. We rely on them heavily. Usually the time at which we'll begin doing the reference checks is when the company has agreed to interview the candidate. So if you're not going through a recruiter or if that recruiter doesn't do reference checks, first of all, I would question your quality of work. But if you're not using a recruiter, if you're doing a mass hiring event, you've decided who you want to bring in, or people have brought themselves in. And so anybody that you're deciding to do next steps with, as you're scheduling those next steps, ask for who their references are if they've not been provided on their resume. And before you get any further in the interview process, conduct those reference checks. If it's a more entry level employee, that's not always as critical and you don't need to do more than about 1 or 2.
Right.
But when you're doing the reference checks, what I always recommend is nobody is going to give you somebody as a reference who's going to just professionally annihilate them. They're not.
Yep.
They're going to give you somebody who's going to speak favorably about them. So one of the questions, and that's wonderful. We're ultimately seeking to just validate and reinforce what we've already been told, not, right, throw it out the window.
Right.
One of the questions I like to ask of references is, during your engagement with them or your time with them, whether you were a colleague, a peer, a supervisor, or worked directly for them, were there coaching opportunities or areas of development that you guys worked on? How did they respond to that feedback or coaching? Because that's a pressure test for, listen, we know as much as you might love this person that nothing is ever rainbows and cherries and kittens 100% of the time.
Sure.
Tell me about some times that you guys reached adversity, either on a project, something wasn't going well, or you went to them and said, hey, I think this could be maybe a little bit different or better. How did they respond to that feedback or coaching in maybe a time when things weren't ideal?
Bravo.
That will give you a sense of how they respond when things aren't going exactly as planned. Of course, we'd love for everything to be awesome, but on a day that you worked in a retail shop and 3 people called out sick and there was snow and it was you and 2 other people, what'd you guys do?
That's a great question. Absolutely fabulous. Now let's talk about another scenario that a lot of us deal with, and that is, man, we've got a candidate, and out of the 10 things we need them to do, we think they're going to be dynamite at 8, but they're kind of lacking in those other 2. Do you have any tips or suggestions for us in situations like that?
Yeah. One, how critical are the 2 things they're missing on? Because you said
Okay.
it about right. If somebody can hit, and I don't say 75%, I do say 80%. I say 8 out of 10. 70,
All right.
listen, 75% a C and 80% a B. Those are different performances, in my opinion. Those are different.
Hey, it's baseball season right now. 80% is Hall of Fame level,
There you go.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if they check 8 out of the 10 things, but one of those things is they have to have a CPA license and they don't, well,
That's a deal breaker.
okay. So
Yeah.
it's not only the 80%, but you also kind of have to weight the things that they have or the things that they're missing. So, is it a negotiable and is it a specialty or a certification? Let's assume it's not. Okay. Because if it is,
I'm hiring a bud tender.
on to the next one.
Mhm.
Hiring bud tenders, or retail leadership.
Right.
Maybe you're looking for somebody, and think about this, especially in an emergent market. You're not going to have people with a tremendous amount of cannabis experience, at least professionally, in a legal market. So you're hiring salespeople, you're hiring bud tenders. You want somebody who's great with customer experience, who's great with sales, who is reliable, and knows about cannabis. In a newer market, you might not be able to get that cannabis expertise, but do they bring the other 3 to the table? And is it coachable?
Mm-hmm.
Is the skill that they're missing or the background that they're missing a coachable skill? And if it is that candidate somebody that you perceive to be coachable? They may not have this. And that could be a question that you're asking throughout the interview process. Gosh, you check so many of these boxes. The one area that, there might be an opportunity or a gap, we believe we can close that with you quickly. Tell me about times that you've had to, learn on the fly, or, learn through doing, or learn on the job, get that on the job experience. How did you respond in those scenarios? Did you like those scenarios?
And it's usually a lot easier to provide coaching in skill areas than it is in personality.
It is. And so back to the point on, it's less quantifiable and more of a vibe, is as this person sitting in front of you, do you feel like you can have a real, honest, authentic conversation with them?
Sure. In the hiring environment that you're dealing with every single day in the dispensary level, knowing that there are roles that we're hiring managers for our dispensaries and we're hiring bud tenders in a variety of different functions. But as a general rule, when I'm hiring people for dispensaries, are you seeing common things that are of importance to them? What are they looking for? What's important to them?
this kind of ties back on something we said, but people always say, I'm looking for somebody that is a good cultural fit that will stay long-term. Okay.
Right.
Then what is your company culture and what are you doing to attract and engage and retain them long-term?
Okay. So that's important to them. If I'm looking at a bud tender job, again, I'm in Phoenix, and within a 10-minute radius of my home, there are probably 10 to 12 different dispensaries. And if I'm sitting there looking at these dispensaries, what are things that I'm looking for from them? What am I wanting them to provide me in order for me to agree to go to work for them?
One, you're going to need to be competitive and, look at the Starbuckses of the world, right? A bud tender at your dispensary is very similar to a barista at a Starbucks as far as entry level and customer experience, the workload, right? You're standing on your feet for 8 to 10 hours a day.
Sure.
You're working in front of a computer or need to use technology as part of your job. So, look around when I see that a fast food chain or what have you is paying, $16 to $18 an hour. Now, maybe they're not getting tips, but we can't be a dispensary and compete at flat minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, we're more attractive. We do offer tips. You don't go home smelling like French fries. You go home smelling like cannabis, which is arguably a little bit cooler.
I hear you. Hey.
We deal with stuff a little bit differently. We've got access to cooler things. So one, we should be comfortable in that esprit de corps to pitch that. We're not an entry level burger flipper, right? We're dealing with something cool, and it's an isolated audience, and we have things that are unique and differentiated in our industry. Now, at the same time, we have higher requirements for our bud tenders. ID checking, not, selling past daily legal limits, things from a compliance perspective, that there's some ownership that we have to put on them. And so I think it's important that we recognize and compensate accurately. I also know that there's been some challenges in ways to tie performance to bud tender compensation. And this is a little bit state specific, so depending on where you're listening from. But we've worked through ways that don't compromise, either from a compliance or legal perspective, compensating frontline employees for how they perform. And ultimately, it is a sales position. We don't want to, we never want to be perceived as like the used car sales lot, but we do want to educate our consumers and offer them things aside from what they've just come in for. We can't offer them too much given what state daily legal limits are, if they're medical or recreational or what have you. But, if you want somebody to come and stay, you need to offer things that are unique and differentiated, but you need to be competitive with non-industry competitors.
Absolutely.
A Starbucks, and have more pride than, well, we're competing with the burger joint down the street. Well, we're more than that. And we ask more than that. And so let's elevate and let's compete differently to attract those right folks.
Let's talk about, I found someone I like. And again, let's talk more that I'm looking at hiring someone to be let's say an assistant manager, a manager, or maybe even a regional role that I'm overseeing several retail locations. I'm in the state of Ohio, and I oversee the 5 dispensaries my company owns there. And I'm looking at hiring a store manager. One, any tips for how I should approach negotiations and craft a job offer?
Yeah, I think one is have a clear understanding of the compensation model with your finance team and understand what you are able to offer.
Okay.
There is a lot of disparity in cannabis, and I understand why. Operators are at various sizes. They've got various resources from investor perspectives and what have you. But be upfront with what you are looking for and how much you're able to spend on that resource, and be transparent about it. And compensation is not everything, but I think we're fooling ourselves if we don't think it is a major driver. And so ask when you're interviewing this leadership position and you're negotiating for, you know, an annual base wage that might have some kind of monthly or quarterly or annual bonus component. Realistically, what does that look like? And especially on the sales side and in retail, not only do you have a well-defined compensation structure, but you have an ability to show them the reality to realize that, the runway to realize that. You know, if we say, hey, we've got this compensation structure for managers where, you know, we compensate you based off of your monthly goals. And if you hit that, you get a bonus. If you outperform that, you get a bonus. You know, we'll give you a budget for headcount or, you know, inventory or purchasing. If you stay underneath that, there's some scratch in it for you. But be able to say like, hey, this is a $65,000 or $70,000 a year job. There is, you know, another 25 or 35 grand in annual bonus potential. Here's how you earn that. So being candid about compensation, and being prepared to have those discussions and clearly vetting what somebody is looking for on their end. If they say, yeah, you know, I'm not going to get out of bed for anything less than 100K base, and this base is 75, even if you can get them to 100, be clear with them and say, the base is 75. Here's how we'll get you to 100. But I just heard you say you're not getting your keys and putting your shoes on for less than 100K base. If we're not in alignment here, let's not get to those conversations. Let's save that time and energy up front so you don't get all excited and feel like we have the right candidate. And then it's like, well, gosh, we've been 25 grand, you know, variance the entire time we were interviewing and hiring this person.
Absolutely. What I want to touch upon, what are some of the common mistakes you see people make when they're recruiting in their dispensaries?
Sure. Really quickly, can we go back? Just I want to touch on one more thing.
We're here to provide value to people, so absolutely, yes.
When you're crafting those positions for leadership, those offer letters, where I see a lot of people not get credit for the offer, quantify everything that's included in that. And what I mean by that is if your job offer includes 2 weeks of paid time off, what does that equate to per year? Is that another $1,500 or $2,000?
Absolutely.
If you're offering benefits to them, depending on your benefits package, and I'll just kind of use a round number, but if that's $500 a month per employee, that times 12 is X number of dollars. And so when you craft that job description, get credit for total cash compensation. Here is your base, it's 65 or 70. Here is the commission or bonus potential that you have, and we'll attach a table that shows you how you can achieve that, but that's good for 25 to 30 grand. Okay, now we're up to, let's say 65 and 30. Now we're up to 95. Well, we're going to give you $2,000 a year in paid time off. Take credit for that. We're going to supplement your healthcare insurance with $500 a month. That's 3 grand a year, 6 grand a year. Take credit for that. Now, that compensation of 65 and 30 base and commission of 95 is now up to, you know, north of 105 or 110 when you take credit for the total value of the cash compensation that you're offering.
And most of your competitors aren't going to do that, are they?
Right. Highlight employee benefits, right? Free products, like put everything in that job offer that makes it a holistic picture of these are all of the benefits and its monetary value in that offer.
When should I look at using a recruiter, and when might I just do this on my own?
Couple of things. One, for hard to fill positions, or what has been, and I'm not going to say for hard to fill, and that's anything. But when you've got a really specific need, I'll give you a couple of examples. I recently worked on an assistant controller position because they had to be CPA and they had to come from the manufacturing or CPG background. Those were requirements from my client based on their existing finance team and who they had and who they didn't and what they were hiring for. Those two boxes needed to be checked. And listen, they're like, we posted the position and we got applicants from all walks of life, and some had CPA, some didn't, some came from manufacturing, some didn't. I need you to qualify and vet people and only bring us
Got it.
these people.
So when
So
I
that's
need a
what we
really
consider
defined criteria is a good time to use somebody like you when I've got really specific requirements.
The other time that people often use us is when they don't have the bandwidth internally. It might be a more emergent team that has one HR person and they're supporting 3 dispensaries and a production facility. And with the day-to-day HR, employee relations, labor relations matters, they don't have time to do talent acquisition. They don't have time to do recruiting. The other thing I'll say is, even if you do have the internal team, pressure test their processes. Where we add a lot of value is, one, not only taking that off of your plate, but the entirety with which we will do it. One, your search is entirely customized based on what you need. In many cases, I'll speak for myself, I don't use job descriptions. I will write job descriptions based on what the company has told me they need. It's not like I'm going to go rip down director of retail from Indeed. We're going to write what goes into that. So there's a more customized advertising of the position. There's a customized search. When I say advertising, we're going to post it. We're going to make it unique. We're going to add things that, kind of play up to our industry. It's not just going to be, here's something on Indeed. We're going to make a custom job description. We're going to do a custom search and qualification for you. So I always like to say, like, resume schmesume, I want to get to know the person, right? We're even having this discussion because they were interested enough to apply, or we saw enough of their paper background to reach out. Let's go from there. Here's the other thing I'll say. Recruiters, myself included, have a knack for tapping into passive candidates. And those are often some of the best and most talented. Yep. So we're able to tap into people who you're not going to organically find, or, maybe wouldn't naturally reach out to you. We're going to do the references check, as we mentioned. We're going to we're going to help take a lot of the onboarding off of your HR team. If they need special certification to work in the cannabis industry in your state, we'll make sure that we're helping them do that along the way. And the other thing about using a recruiter instead of, just online services and whatever active applicants, is you run the risk of missing a really good one. What if the best candidate is at the bottom of that pile? They happen to be applicant number 175 of 176, and you guys stop looking at applicants at applicant 125. Right. So we come into play often when there's a hard to fill or very specific need of a role. We come into play when there's not the bandwidth on the team or the expertise. I have had HR directors come to me and say, we have a talent acquisition team. They're not equipped for this level of role, whether it's a leadership position, or we have such a need. Think April and October, when we're starting kind of the big retail seasons with all of the summer holidays, or we've got crops that are coming down and we need to heavy up on retail bud tenders or heavy up on processing or trimmers in the cultivation side. And they're like, my talent acquisition team is not equipped to hire 20 people for 4 dispensaries all at once and another 10 people. Well, great. We'll coordinate your hiring event. We'll plan it. We'll market it. We'll get, no less than 50% of what you need, at least partially selected during that event. Then also we'll take it off your plate, go do those reference checks for the 10 or 15 people we select, coordinate with you as far as, like, do we want a second interview? Do we not? Where do we go? And then get them off and running with start dates.
And from my own personal experience, if I'm starting in a new market and I need to hire to get all started up and all of that, recruiters are absolutely fabulous. But the point I don't want anyone to lose is that recruiters like your firm are absolutely outstanding at finding the right candidates, because a lot of the right candidates are open to another job but aren't out actively looking right now. So they'll never, ever, ever be aware that you need them unless a recruiter or somebody's doing some sort of outreach. And I think depending upon the position that they're hiring for, that more so than any other reason is a good reason to employ someone like you.
Well, and conversely, the passive candidates aren't out there actively looking. And on the flip side, overly active candidates or job hoppers are out there just hitting submit on every easy application that they can, and might still be working, might not be, but probably aren't going to demonstrate the long-term loyalty that you'd be looking for in an employee versus somebody that we go and seek out and say, hey, we want you for the following reasons, and let me tell you about this super attractive offer and why the company's cool and the brand's awesome and the team's amazing.
There you go. In just a minute, I'm going to make sure that you know how to reach Jessica, how to get in touch with her company, find her website, all that good stuff. But before I do, what kind of positions do you commonly help people for in the cannabis industry? What kind of positions are you recruiting for?
Most commonly, we are doing entry-level leadership positions through executive level work. So think on the entry-level side, project managers of a variety of departments, whether it's an HR manager, a construction project manager, real estate compliance, up through the executive team, whether that's an advisory position, a CFO, a president, a managing director, and truly anything in between. I think for me, the unique part, I don't think I know, the unique part for myself and my practice is we're not department or discipline specific in the sense that we only place finance roles or only place production. Because of my personal roots in the industry, I'm industry specific. I service and cater to exclusively cannabis and can adjacent operators. And because I've either sat in the seats of the roles that they're asking me to fill, or I've sat next to folks in the roles that they've asked me to fill, whether it be on production or finance or sales or HQ operations support side, I understand how to ask them questions differently and also how to vet that candidate differently. And so we're not department or discipline specific as much as we are industry specific. And, you know, we are products of the cannabis space. We do some frontline hiring. It tends to be more in that example that I provided earlier in kind of the event where we, you know, a client that we've worked with or somebody reaches out and said, we need to do a hiring event. We don't have the bandwidth to do it, or we don't have the experience or background to do this the way that we want, to make it unique, to make it compelling, to make it stand out. Can you help us with that? But when it's more of the hourly positions, we'll do more of those in bulk or mass hiring, but more so you'll find us in an entry-level leadership role, like I said, a $65,000, $75,000 project manager or accountant, what have you, up through C-suites and everything in between.
Got it. Absolutely perfect. Give us your website address. Where are you at online? Oh, she takes us at grnmilehigh.com. I'll do it.
Thank you. Yes, grnmilehigh.com. We are on LinkedIn. We are on Instagram. The other thing I'll point out, and we can include a link at the end of this as well, but I do have, and it's a free resource, but if any of you guys have ever seen those little free libraries in your neighborhood where you can take a book, leave a book, I've created a digital version that is out there, and we'll put the link out there, but it's kind of my curated catalog of 5-minute reads, best practices and tools when it comes to all things talent management. Best practices when it comes to attracting and recruiting, training and developing, engaging and retaining. And so, you know, happy to provide those resources to any of the audience that we've got here. And if you guys ever have any questions about anything that you've read on there or anything else that we've talked about today, by all means, hit me up. I would love to be buds with all of y'all. There you go. Outstanding. As she said, we're going to make sure that we put those links in the comment section so that you're able to access all that information. Lots of free stuff. Best way for people to connect with you. How do they stay in touch with Jessica? LinkedIn is a great resource. I like to say that I'm in a very committed relationship with LinkedIn. So I'm always on there. But other than that, email, call, text, social media, except I'm far too old for TikTok or Snapchat, but anything else is fair game. All right, outstanding. You know, let's conclude this with the reality. The reality is the quality of the people that you have working in your dispensary and in your business, more so than really any other factor, is really going to shape the success of your business.
Jessica shared with you a lot of great tips, a lot of great pointers, a lot of great strategies that you can use to employ for better hiring success. Make sure you take advantage of the free resources that she's offered you today. Lots of great tips and lots of great information. You can find her online. grnmilehigh.com is her website. If you need help with professional recruiting, please explore what Jessica and her team can do for you. You're going to be absolutely astounded and amazed. This is part of the Dispo Growth Summit. We have 7 other presentations designed to help you grow sales. I hope you take advantage of all of them. Thank you for joining us. I hope our paths cross again real soon.